welcome to this brand new kind of thing that we're doing. We've never done this before, called More Minutes with Frank. We have 15 minutes with Frank, and I really try to do my best to keep it to 15 minutes. But I have such great conversations with these friends in youth ministry, and what I want to do is spend some more minutes with these friends in youth ministry. And so this is a new YouTube thing. We'll see how it works out. I'm just going to be able to sit here, talk to some friends in youth ministry, just have a good conversation, stuff that I'm wrestling with, working through, and see how they can kind of share some of their genius and their ideas. And so I'm here with Ansley Higginbotham. Is that how you say it?
I like how you say it with a laugh. It comes with a laugh. Yes, Higginbotham.
Higginbotham. And what did you say earlier? You said you feel like you're in what kind of novel?
A Charles Dickens character. I'm a Charles Dickens character now.
I love it.
My maiden name is Jones. So.
Awesome. Well, Ansley, we met last week at DYM 200. We were put together because we were in Team Salmon, and we were told
We dominated.
We dominated. We played that pumpkin game that DYM came out with, and we found the pumpkin and we won the game. And I got a T-shirt that's too small for me, but we won it, and it's great. And from that game, I got to just kind of sneak some conversations with you here and there throughout the time, and I just fell in love with like what you're doing and like who you are, and I just wanted to like have a conversation with you to kind of extend some of the conversation that you and I were having privately at the conference, to talk more about something that people who've been listening to my podcast have known that has been evolving in my heart about this conversation of women in ministry. And so what I want to do before we go any further is I want you to introduce yourself, who you are, where you're from, what's your context like, and anything else you want us to know about who Ansley is.
Okay, wow. Okay, so my name is Ansley, and I am the Director of Youth Ministries for Reveille United Methodist Church in Richmond, Virginia. So I live on my husband's family beef cattle farm out in the country, but I work in the city here at Reveille. So I have been a lifelong United Methodist. I have worked for other churches, but I have been a United Methodist since birth, and have always been in the Virginia Conference of the United Methodist Church. And I'm a Virginia Tech Hokie, and I worked in marketing and advertising before I made the switch to youth ministry. So I was in volunteer youth ministry and finally jumped in as a profession about 10 years ago. So I have a certificate. I'm certified in youth and theology from Princeton Theological Seminary, and that was a great experience. So I've been at this church about a year and a half, and I am excited to get involved in things like DYM and like broaden our scope of learning from Reformed Calvinists like yourself.
I love it. You just said two things I actually didn't know about you. So you went to Princeton Theological Seminary. I actually have a friend who went there. We'll talk about this off the show. I want to know if you know this guy. I've heard really cool things about the seminary at Princeton. Yeah. And then secondly, you were in marketing and advertising, you said?
Yes, I was a communications major, and I worked in marketing and advertising before but I wasn't like a creative. I was like a traffic manager, and so I was really good at project managing, moving projects around, and a lot of the same things that make you good at communicating with parents and keeping all the balls in the air as a youth minister. So yeah.
Well, maybe we need to have another conversation another day about those elements flowing into student ministry, because that's really cool. So, at DYM 200, what's great about that conference, and this is not a video to just promote DYM 200, but it builds relationships so quickly in 3 days, and you feel very, very relaxed and open. And we had some very, very heavy discussions as a conference about our own personal soul care, to ministering to LGBT students, to a wide range of stuff. And so I immediately just went to you, and I just threw all my cards at the table. I'm like, hey, I hope I don't offend you by some of these questions or thoughts I have, but I just want to know, because I just want to have these conversations. And so what I want to do is I want to spend our time talking about women in ministry, and I want to put my cards on the table, explaining where my lens is. I want to hear from you, and I just want to have some real conversation, understanding that there might be some theological barriers that are going to prevent me from agreeing with everything you might say,
Right.
or what people are listening. But understanding that, like, at the basic premise, I want to honor women, and I want them to feel respected and heard, and also I have students who are loving Jesus and have gifts and talents that are for ministry, and I don't want them to feel like they can't do something simply because of their gender. And so understanding that I might have a specific lens that might limit to something, I want to know what we can do. So putting my cards on the table, as you said, I'm Reformed. I'm a Calvinist. So that's kind of shapes my soteriology, my theology. But more than that, I'm also a complementarian. And if you've been a lifelong Methodist, I'm a lifelong complementarian in the sense that I've only been in churches that have male leadership, both in the elders boards and the senior leadership. And for the most part, until recently, women have only been allowed at the most to be on like the piano on the worship team or in children's ministry, like a lead children's director. It actually wasn't until DYM about 3 or 4 years ago when I started interacting more with DYM that I started engaging women pastors in youth ministry. And if I'm completely honest, it made me a little uncomfortable. I'm like, these heathens ignoring First Timothy. What is happening? And then I met Katie Edwards at Saddleback, and I'm like, she is a legend, and she is amazing. And I met Neely McQueen, and I'm like, she is great. And so it's not like the culture is compromising my theology, but more of like questioning, like, okay, I get there might be some standards in Scripture of what can and cannot do, but like, can they really not do student ministry? And can they really not do other things? And so that's my lens. Those are my cards. I want to know kind of where you are, or where have you been in terms of your perspective of ministry and kind of what your views are, obviously, in women in leadership.
Okay. So as a lifelong United Methodist, especially in the Virginia conference, so I can't speak for every conference because I don't have experience in those conferences, and it may have evolved differently over the last 4 decades of my life. But in the Virginia conference, I've always grown up knowing women as senior pastors. When I was young, they were rare. They were more rare than they are now, but they did exist. And in fact, in the United Methodist Church, our senior pastor is our bishop of the Virginia conference is a woman, and our last bishop was a woman. So not only are they allowed to serve as senior pastors, but they're allowed to serve in any ministry role and also at the top leadership of the denomination. So they are the senior pastors' bosses. They're allowed to serve as district superintendents. They serve as bishops. They serve in any role that you can imagine. Women or men equally could be considered. Now, are there still more men? Probably, yes. Are there still more men as lead pastors? Probably, yes. And more and more, I do see more women as lead pastors, and I don't know why that is. Are we giving them more opportunities? Is it, more acceptable? I have no idea. But that is a norm for me. In fact, you and I were talking about this, and we don't even use those words, egalitarian and complementarian.
Yeah.
We don't even have that differentiation. So unless you're following people that argue about it on Twitter a lot, as a United Methodist, you don't even, you're, and I even asked around here after we talked about that, and everyone's like, yeah, I don't know what that means.
Wow.
So it's not that we don't even make that distinction. We already, I guess, we're inherently egalitarian. So there is, and personally, my view is, I'm definitely a company girl. I'm United Methodist. I 100% believe that women could serve in any ministry role, and that's the only truth I've known. And I have examined that in Scripture, and come to that same conclusion. But like you, there are places where I question the contradictions. And I examine those and I wrestle with those, just like perhaps a complementarian who wants to be open to evolving would want to do.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I think it's fascinating. Like, and it makes sense. Like, why have labels for something that is not an issue, right? Like in the conservative tradition or the complementarian tradition, like we're always going to have women who are going to come up to the ranks. They're going to have leadership skills, and then they're going to hit a ceiling where they're going to say, well, why can't I do X, Y, Z? Why can't I preach? Why can't I teach? I mean, even in my own context, we just had a senior pastor transition about a year ago, and someone in our church, because our description for the job description said that like the next man who takes this role will do this, this, and this.
Right.
And someone sent an email like, well, why did you say man? Why couldn't it be person? Why could and so these questions always come up, and so therefore
Right.
we have to define them. Where
Right.
if the United Methodist Church or other traditions that don't have, for lack of better terms, barriers to be in leadership, no matter what gender you are, then why have those labels? So I think, you were at DYM 200, and what was amazing is there were, how many women were there? Like maybe 20?
20, approximately 10%. So that's the number I heard thrown about, and that's the number, I could sort of count, but I mean, it's an approximate, but about 10%. Yeah.
And when you see 20 people out of 200, does that encourage you, discourage you, indifferent?
It was very discouraging. So,
Really?
and again, I was clueless. So for instance, when we have a local gathering of United Methodist youth workers, it's just as many women as men. So then women might have more part-time jobs than men. They might, there might be struggles, there might be challenges, but you're the only woman in the room. And so I didn't think about that being an issue until I already signed up. I knew that a lot of people there would be more conservative than me, that it was an ecumenical gathering, and I needed to be prepared to learn alongside other faith traditions, but I had no idea until and that was kind of a blow. So, and if I would have known it from the beginning, I don't think it would have been uncomfortable for me, but just because I was so oblivious, I knew it would be more men than women. I think I kind of had that feeling, but just such a stark contrast. I was surprised. So for instance, when we broke up into our small groups, you'd be the only woman in your small group, and to know you're going to the other side of the country, to know you're going to hang out probably a lot of conservative faith traditions, and then to be the only woman, I was a little taken aback, and I actually did question my decision to go.
Wow, really?
Not based on the conservative nature of the participants, but once I realized, and I'm comfortable around men. I'm not like afraid of the men. I don't have that, like you were talking about, sort of Me Too or even like Billy Graham rule kind of. I don't have those concerns, and so but even still, it did surprise me. I surprised myself how much it made me question wanting to participate.
Wow. I know what's interesting is this is my third year going, and this was the most women ever, and I was like cheering, like, because like I know how much Josh and Doug and everyone else at DYM want more women, and I think maybe we can talk about this later. There are some contextual issues about maybe even finding women in ministry in probably different parts of the country. Obviously, conservative traditions are going to lean more complementarian, but when I saw the amount of women there, I was like cheering my head off, and knowing that over the past few years, I've been able to build some great relationships with the women. Right. I think what was encouraging is, out of the speakers, it was pretty balanced, right? Like there was like a balanced amount of women speakers and men speakers. Yeah.
Yeah, and it wasn't like they had to dig. I mean, those are like the greatest. They're
greatest, absolutely.
And so it just goes to show that it's not that hard to find us. We're there. So it's just a matter of being intentional, I would say, and feeling welcome, and I will say there. Again, not to critique DYM 200, we can do that on something else, but I will say that there were things that I would change if I wanted to be more welcoming to women, but they were minor. I would say on the whole, because of the speaker lineup, because of the way I was treated by men like you, because of the way I was treated by the leadership, and because of the experiences I had in my small group, there's no reason for a woman not to go. So there might be moments where there are just so many men in the room that you're like, that joke's not appropriate. Can we dial that down, guys? Yeah, if you really want more women here, I don't know about that. But it was nothing like offensive or or insulting, and I really did feel like the men there wanted to hear what I had to say, even if they didn't agree, and wanted to collaborate with women. I was very, very relieved. I can't wait to sign up for next year and talk more women into going, because we do need.
Yes. Yes. So when did you start feeling this tension between what you feel like your calling is for your career and this idea that there is a large, I mean, I think I could say this, a large group of individuals within the body of Christ who disagrees
Right.
with your calling? When did you start feeling that?
So, well, I mean, I do have a family. There are people in my family who are more conservative, and even in the United Methodist Church, even though there have been women ministers my whole life, not all the churches wanted to get assigned one. Okay, so, I have always known that balance, and I didn't have a woman senior pastor until I was an adult. So yes, to be perfectly honest. I feel like I always knew I was good at it. So I never felt that discouragement. I mean, I would definitely feel the pang, when something was directed at men instead of men and women. But to be perfectly honest, it wasn't until I started taking more full-time roles like I have now at a bigger church, where I really needed to broaden my scope of learning to to similarly sized churches and ministries. And those particular churches are oftentimes non-denominational or of a conservative tradition. So I do think that kind of like broadening out into the wider world of youth ministry is when I finally realized, oh, this is a thing. And I didn't know it was a thing, and I don't understand why everyone's fighting about this. And wow, okay, so this is a recent realization for me, which I guess maybe I was clueless or naive, but I didn't realize it was going to be a whole thing until even my husband grew up Baptist, but they have since their home church has since become Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, so
Sure.
the rural branch of Baptist. So even then, even the people that I knew that came from a more conservative background, even if they didn't agree, they would support. So yeah, it's almost like a whole new world of I don't know, gender bias, or what did you call it, masculine?
Oh, I mean, I made a joke about toxic masculinity.
Yeah,
about
toxic masculinity. But I will say, just like anything else on the internet, I am finding, having attended DYM 200 with lots of different men. I mean, all kinds. There's nothing but men, and you got all of them. I really realize now that those are the people that are toxic about it are not the people that want to come together to be better at their ministry. So even the people who disagree with me, and so you got to ignore the internet fight, or those, because those aren't real. Those aren't the real out in those people aren't out in the light. They're not out in the open. The people that want to get awesome at serving their students and their families aren't like that. So even if we do very much disagree on theology.
And I think what you said is interesting is when you start wanting to broaden your perspective of student ministry and see what other churches are doing, like when I moved from Florida, I moved from a smaller non-denominational conservative church in Tampa, and I moved to Arkansas. I mean, I went more south when I left Florida and more conservative when I got to Arkansas. But I started trying to find more friends, youth ministry fellows outside of student ministry, to kind of learn more about what they're doing. And kind of what you said, that's when I started being confronted with the reality that there are a lot of student ministries, and the opposite, that there's an amazing amount of Methodist youth ministries or Presbyterian youth ministries or any other ministry that affirms women in ministry, that I had to I don't want to say wrestle with, but navigate those waters. Is am I going to choose not to listen to voices that are killing it in student ministry simply because my church's theological position is that they couldn't work here? And so it's kind of one of those things where my thought is, I don't have to work where they work, and they don't have to work where I work, but I can take their ideas and we can share thoughts. And so, I mean, the moment I kind of realized that it's okay to disagree and I could still get amazing ideas from a different denomination, different tradition, felt so freeing that it's who cares if maybe we can't work under the same elder board, but we can work together to lead kids towards Jesus, you know?
And
And
wasn't Jesus always questioning things, questioning things, asking people to rethink their positions and to be more empathetic and understanding of each other? I mean, that's what Jesus was constantly doing. So if we want to mirror Christ, we really can't stay in our UMC bubble. We can't stay in our Reformed Calvinist bubble. We have to be reaching out to each other, or the people that are trying to see Christ in us are
yeah.
going to be super confused.
Yeah. Well, the Reformed Calvinist bubble of student ministry is very small and kind of boring. So I have to get out of it occasionally to to find game ideas. There's no good game ideas in the Reformed world. So, but let me ask you this question. So this is kind of like veering into the broader perspective of men and women in culture and life. Is, you know, for years, and people have even debated and argued whether this is true or not. But I think there is some like truth to this. Is there is a pay gap between men and women, where a man will get paid $1, where a woman will get paid 40 cents to the dollar at a specific field, and there's charts across the internet for different fields. But one thing that I always just assumed is that these denominations that are much more affirming towards women in ministry would just pay the same, you know, to women in that role. And I remember I like kind of just like gently mentioned that to you, and you were like, "No way!" And I was like, you just shattered my glass ceiling of what this truth is. So can you help me understand, like, is there a pay gap for men? And you don't have to be the authority on this subject.
I can't quote you statistics, okay? So that would be something that we would need to examine more scientifically, I think, to speak on it. But here's where the pay gap lies, okay, is that women face different, and this is where you and I really got to talking, I think, at DYM, is that women face different career challenges than men. So faith traditions or ministry industries, I don't know what you call, you know, sort of the youth ministry realm, that want to empower women, that want to raise up women leaders, have to consider that. And so the pay gap is often, for instance, I have a friend who recently took an appointment because she may want to have another baby. So she took her appointment. She asked for an appointment based on needing more time to have another baby. So even though I think she is lead pastor material, she made a decision based on wanting to have kids. And so that may also be true for, you know, seminary. That may also be true for, you know, affordability of seminary. I mean, there are a lot of things that the United Methodist Church does to sponsor women to get their education. But in general, I would say that women tend to take the lower paying jobs. They tend to go for those jobs because maybe they're part-time or maybe they're less demanding while we have kids. I know I did that. And, you know, and I was always worried how it would affect my resume. Or men don't apply for those jobs as much. So a man may not even apply for a job that isn't going to be enough to support his family, where I might be willing to do that because we're on two incomes. Does that make sense? So the pay gap, I think, still exists. I mean, you know, I'm sure there are people who would watch this and like give me some statistics that say that's not true. It's hard for me to measure because typically youth ministry is one of the lowest paid program staff in the church. And so, you know, comparatively, it's hard for me to compare whether whether my pay is because I'm in youth ministry and I'm not a clergy person, or if it is because I am a youth minister. And the other truth in United Methodist Church is if you are an ordained deacon, you do have some thresholds that the church needs to meet. But in my experience, I mean, this is anecdotal. I have been at churches where I feel like the associate pastor or someone else would have gotten paid more. Yes, if they're a man, absolutely. I felt like women were working under their pay grade, like most women I know in every.
So, I mean, so it seems like there's a contextual issue here where, like, because just the reality of child rearing and giving birth, that there are some setbacks because like physically you can't do the job because you have to like go give birth and have maternity leave and
We choose to take time off and stay home, or we want to be able to have maternity leave, and most churches don't pay maternity leave.
No, I know. And
not even in the UMC, unless you are clergy, you are not required to pay your full-time staff maternity leave. So that would be a place where the glass ceiling has not been shattered in the UMC. That is the truth. That they, in fact, I've worked at a church that didn't even pay me health insurance to be full-time. Right. So, which attracted a lot more women because their husbands had health insurance. No men applied for jobs there because they needed health insurance. So,
yeah. So that contextual aspect is interesting though, because a lot of times these women who are in ministry have husbands that might work full-time jobs. They're willing to take jobs that maybe is just as intense or just as like it could be equal to First Baptist Richmond youth pastor. I don't know anything about that church if it's real, but that youth pastor there, and it could be like the same size youth group, same size programs and everything, but because the church is just saying we're only going to pay $30,000, a woman would say they'll take it because they don't necessarily need to get paid $45,000-$50,000.
That they need to, but they want to. I would say those jobs are going to be less competitive and more likely to go to a woman. Yes.
Wow. Yeah, and I don't know if that's right or not. Like I hear what you're saying, and I'm wondering like,
right.
Like if it, just because like I think in general churches don't do a great job of paying youth pastors. We talked about that, and I think like there is like this idea where like usually youth ministry is like the fourth or fifth position a church will hire. And so when they think of salary, they'll definitely lowball that unless it's like a tenured youth pastor. And this is like, I think across the board for the most part, unless it's like the church is just banking. But like, it's interesting. It's like, it's almost like I don't want to speak in like hyperbolic language, but like almost like a systemic issue where it's like churches are going to continue to just have low salary caps and women are the ones willing to take those jobs because they don't necessarily have to have the full income for the household or something.
Right. Or we feel like we're not worth that much because we're going to take it for our kids.
Well, I don't want to see. I don't want to even say that because I don't want to say that woman's worth like their work is less.
So the point of that is that there are lots and lots of dynamic, different reasons why men and women are not the same. But this is where we get into what you and I were talking about offline, which sort of led to this conversation, is because women need to determine what their value is within themselves and what their value is in Jesus Christ. And so once we do that, and we're not supposed to measure ourselves by the world standards, so we need to stop doing that. And so when I was having babies and my husband, he was in law school, so it was too demanding for me to be able to go. Like right now I go on 8 trips a year. I can't do that while I'm nursing a baby. Although I have been on trips 8 months pregnant, and I have brought my baby to work. I have, used a breast pump in a shed at a church retreat, but in general, I was not able to take the same types of positions because of our family needs, and those change over time. And at the time I kept thinking I couldn't work again. I can't work. No one will hire me. And then people kept hiring me. And then I realized, wait a second, I must have something they want. In fact, I had a male youth minister who called me and said, Ansley, do you want to go back to work? And I said, well, I'd love to, but I'm pregnant and I have a 1-year-old. And you don't want me because why would you want to hire that? And he said, I need someone who can get the job done. I don't care. So that is when I realized I am really valuable to someone. I'm really valuable to some church. I'm really valuable to some ministry. And then even taking those kind of positions as assistant and part-time and short-term positions, because I kept wanting to be of service. And so even then I would feel like, well, my resume looks terrible. I don't know if I should keep doing this. But then I had to realize, well, no, there's value in that. I've worked at all these different types of churches in a short period of time where other people haven't had that kind of experience. So I think it really is important for women to know what their value is, again, no matter their faith tradition, what is your value as a professional? And if you value yourself as a professional and other people value your professional skills, and your work ethic and your ability, then of course they're going to work around your family needs. Of course they're going to, hopefully pay you what you deserve. And of course you're going to be able to compete with men. If they're not as qualified as you, they're not as qualified. So
that's good. So I have like two more questions to kind of finish our conversation. Okay. When it comes to me, the complementarian youth pastor,
okay,
I have, obligations to my elder board, and I have obligations to my church, and I still, as much as I love you and I love these women in ministry, I still personally hold to a complementarian view, though I think I think there's much more room for women in ministry, in my view, than the broader church who are complementarian have led on. And that's something I'm wrestling with. I want to ask you, and like I said, you don't have to be the leading voice in this if you don't want to, but what advice would you give to the complementarian youth pastor and say, hey, this is how you can honor the women in your ministry, whether they're volunteers or whether they're students. This is how you can honor them and give them space to grow in their gifting and talents without breaking the rules, right? What would you say to them?
So there's a few things. One, just to even take a step back from that, let's say, so the way I understand complementarianism, you're holding women in a high esteem, and you are they can expect a certain level of respect from you as a complementarian. So a woman could expect that. So in order to be an appropriate professional in your field, and in order to serve the young women that are in your youth group, and in order to serve their parents and to serve alongside your volunteers, you're going to have to be exposed to women in your profession.
Yeah.
So completely just disregarding that is really a loss for you in your ministry, because how can you learn more about women if you surround yourself with men all the time? For instance, if we're at a conference and you're thinking, you're at a conference that women don't maybe feel comfortable coming to, well, you have to ask yourself why, because you're hoping to attract women as volunteers. You're hoping to raise up young women for ministry, at least within their own family. And if they don't respect you when you're being a professional, you have to question how that's going to work for you. So I would say that you should want it regardless. And if you need to seek out ways to be with other women and learn more about them and learn more about women as professionals. If you don't find yourself exposed to any women pastors, well, there's women nonprofit leaders. There are women professionals that are your parents. And there are plenty of ways to be exposed to professional women and be a big part of helping your church families raise powerful and confident women. And I would also say that, not to be so quick to dismiss women's opinions. And like, for instance, right now, a lot of men are questioning, why women complain about certain things, or why they believe people without the facts, or why they take a certain side, or and I would say, listen, you can learn something from that. You don't then have to agree because you listened. And I think you and I both could think of a million times we listened to someone else, and maybe it did change our mind a little bit, at least in the way that we serve the people around us. I'm sure you're not only hoping to reach the gospel with just people who are going to agree with you. You're hoping to reach people with all kinds of people with the gospel. And also, really dialing down the gender wars. Don't. And women can do this too, but we sort of feel the need to defend ourselves a lot, and men can take the lead on creating an environment where women do feel heard. That's what was so great about my experience at DYM 200 is I never once felt like anybody was um, patronizing me or dismissing me. And so surely that's a room full of 180 men who wanted to hear what women had to say. So I just feel like there are, and there's, you might have to change your bro culture a little bit. There might have been jokes you used to be able to make when it was a room full of men, and you know what? Now you can't. And are we so stubborn that we can't change? Or you may feel irritated that a woman gets to be on maternity leave, and you don't. I mean, there are being sensitive even to. I've noticed I've changed a lot in the way I deal with parents since I've had kids, because I know what moms deal with. I know what the mental load is a real thing. It's a real life thing. And so now I'm more sensitive to my parents that I know are dealing with that mental load. And so you can be respectful of, the moms that seem like, they're ditzy or we're scatterbrained when really we're just trying to handle 2 full-time jobs at one time.
Wow.
So, things like that.
I think, what you said about, I think I've always said that DYM, the 100, the very first one 2 years ago when I first went to it, and
I'm in there.
There was like 2. There was
Okay.
2. One of my good friends, Allison Williams, she is.
She talked me off the ledge. She was like, "Nope, they love women. They want you there."
Oh, she is amazing. I love Allison Williams. But like, she was there. But, I heard Katie Edwards speak, and I heard Neely McQueen speak. And Katie just, like, she wasn't there trying to be, like, a women's voice. She was a woman youth pastor who I think her thing was just, like, how to develop teams. And,
Right.
like, hearing her speak, I was just, like, in awe of, like, she's amazing. Neely McQueen talked more specifically about, like, loving your female students as a male youth worker and, like, how to deal with that, And so she brought up so many, like, that year wrecked my brain where she talked about, like, if you have a dress code for women when it comes to bathing suits, what does that say about when the guys can wear whatever they want? And then having conversations about, like, appropriate hug versus not appropriate hug, and saying, like, it's like just really, like, challenging us of, like, it's easy for a guy to think about guys and think about how from perspective of a guy, but, like, be more mindful of women and in the room, and I think what you just said is, like, being able to listen in a non-patronizing way. I think there's, like, at least for my own heart, I'm not going to speak for anybody else, but for my own heart, DYM in those conferences and more, maybe it's not so much DYM, but just be able to have these interactions with great women leaders have revealed to me some unchecked chauvinism that perhaps I wasn't even aware of. And it's, like, convicted me to where I'm in this place now where, like, I'm overtly trying to raise up female leaders in my leadership team to have higher roles and be able to have them engage in the conversations of where this ministry goes. But I think what you said is just, like, listening in a non-patronizing way is very, very good. But it's something that's as easy as it is for you to say that. Like, it goes to unchecked, is like checking your own unchecked chauvinism, because I feel like it is a boys club, and it's easy to keep it as a boys club because if you're in a church that doesn't really have female leaders, you can kind of create a culture where it's very masculine and very kind of marginalizing towards women without even saying you want to do that. And having these conversations and asking my female leaders, do you feel like I've made an inappropriate comment in a leader meeting and stuff like that? And they said yes. And I was like, oh no, like I didn't realize that what I said sounded demeaning or until I had those conversations. That's helpful.
And I would also say, there's like the whole Billy Graham rule thing, and you mentioned, sort of what do men do who are afraid in the Me Too.
Well, this is like my last question is I want to affirm women leaders, and I want them in my ministry, and I want to do that. And, like, there might be a place where I might have a second full-time position, and, like, I really, like, my dream is to have that to be a woman. But I would say, if just putting my cards out in the past year and a half, I'm terrified just because of the amount of, like, men being accused of different things, and, like, even with this new Supreme Court thing, men being accused of things that they've done decades ago, like I'm not minimizing any kind of gross actions those men did, but what I'm saying is like I want to make sure that yes, I'm above reproach with my interactions with these women, and but at the same time, I want to be able to have that intimacy that a pastor can have with a co-laborer or just a woman, and be able to build them up to everything God wants them to be. I don't think Jesus was ever accused of anything, and he was very intimate with women. Like
Right.
the woman at the well. Like I mean, he was alone with that woman, talking deeply about her own life and her own sexuality. And like, but will I get arrested for doing that, or like will I get accused of anything for doing
Right.
that? So, as a woman interacting with men, what would you suggest to a man who says, "I want to do this for women, but I also don't want to put myself in a bad place"? What would you say?
So, so that is a hard question to answer for women who are not complementarians. And there are plenty who are, by the way. So a lot of times these kind of arguments that happen on the youth ministry interwebs, there are just as many, maybe not just as many, but there are at least some women who feel the same way that you might if you're a complementarian, or if you are worried, if you have the same fears. I guess you don't have to be complementarian to have those same concerns. And I mean, I have been, I the two most influential people to me in youth ministry were men, and they were men who respected me, who did not make me feel like there was something gross or weird about being pregnant or having a baby, or nursing a baby or anything like that. And they never made me feel like they were uncomfortable in the room with me. I mean, it's really difficult for me to express what other people think of as normal everyday behavior. And so I would say a couple of things. One is that every woman is not out to accuse you of something. So there you go. So assume the best of people. And also, in every other profession, men and women have to work together. So let's say you and I are in sales, okay? And I am the lead sales manager, and you are my new hire, and we have to get in the car together and go see all of our clients. That's what we have to do. That's our job. And we just got to do our job. And you don't have to be in a car to get accused of something. You don't have to be alone in a building together to get accused of something. I mean, oftentimes, it is something like, even more intimate than that. It's not just riding in a car to a meeting together or something like that. And, I would say that, you're a professional. You're not exempt from professional behavior because you're in the church. And as a complementarian, it is your responsibility to respect another professional or another woman and treat them like Jesus. And so if Jesus isn't avoiding women, then, and a lot of people would say, well, Jesus was sinless. I mean, this conversation comes up all the time. Okay, great. Jesus was sinless and you're not. I don't know. But I do also think the harassment thing is often genderless, and the abuse concerns are often genderless as well. So, I mean, there are men who have come out who have been sexually assaulted, and did they avoid all men? Did they just stay at home by themselves? What did they mean? So I would say that also the gospel is messy, and it's not supposed to be an easy bubble to lock yourself away in and protect yourself from everything. That's not how it works. So I do feel like, if you feel uncomfortable in a specific situation, you feel like a person makes you uncomfortable, then of course you should feel 100% able to avoid the situation. But to just put all professional women in the category of I'm not going to be alone with that person, I I mean, from my perspective, that's just simply a stretch. And I just feel like, um, you know, I mean, when the whole thing came out about the Billy Graham rule, um, I texted my colleague's wife and said, "Oh my gosh, all those hot and steamy like trips your husband and I took to Captain D's for lunch are really like rethinking those now." I mean, to me, it's like, how is that a thing? I just we don't even get that. So I do understand sort of the desire to protect yourself, but we didn't get it in youth ministry to protect ourselves. And do I think that you should always take reasonable measures to be a reasonably safe person? Yeah, just like we do with students. Do we open a door? Do we walk out into the open when we feel like we might be in an uncomfortable situation? But we can't necessarily do that with adults. We have to treat other adults as people that we respect, and especially other professionals. And so ask yourself, if you were in another profession, would you be able to shut out every woman? And also don't forget that when you exclude women from a meeting, from an outing, even from a social event, from having your private ear, then you've really not empowered a woman in your ministry. And so when we're excluded from things because you want to keep it just to men, to keep it nice and safe, you have to expect that you're not going to have that growth that you're looking for. You're not going to be able to serve the way you would have before. You're not going to be empowering more women leaders if you stick to that. If you stick to that mindset. So, yeah.
So basically, be professional and don't assault women. It's like, it's good.
What do we say? Okay, when we're a reporter for child abuse, what I tell my volunteers is, when you report to Child Protective Services, they investigate, and there needs to be a pattern established. It's not just one phone call and they haul that person off to jail. Okay, so I would say that sure, there are some sensationalized examples of people who put themselves, when you talk about someone like Brett Kavanaugh knew that he was putting himself up for an incredible amount of ridiculous amount of scrutiny, right? When you run for political office, it's different than you're hiring an associate. And so let's not treat everything like it's going to be a media frenzy. If you are being a professional, if you're respecting women, if you are being sensitive, if you are doing things that a normal professional would do across any profession, I do think that, and you got to be a risk taker, right? To be a disciple.
Yeah. I agree with everything you're saying. I think, obviously, if your church has some certain rules and standards you have to keep that. You know what I'm saying? Like, if your church, I know plenty of churches, that have rules where it says, don't no ride-alongs in cars with someone from the opposite sex by yourself or something like that. There's some rules that your church might have, but I think what you said is really important, though. Whatever the rules are, keep in mind, find ways then to still include the women. You know what I'm saying?
Find a way.
Don't. Yeah, I think that's where a lot of people stop. It's here are the rules. It's just easier just to keep it with just the men or whatever. It's well, there might be some rules here. Well, then every time you go out to have a meeting, do it like a Panera Bread and do it in public, so that way a woman can be present and be intentional with that, because it's better to just find ways to include women than it is to block them out and not have them involved.
That's what I tell my volunteers. When I always tell my volunteers, never, ever, ever be alone with a student. And they're like, well, now what am I supposed to do? Well, here's some tips and tricks. Take it outside if you get left alone. Take it to open the door. Take it to a public place. If you have strict rules at your church, if you really want to include women, you can find a way to do that and still follow the rules. And it's a matter of being generous.
Yeah. Man, this has been so good. And I hope whoever watches this has been helpful for them, because this is something that I've been wrestling for 3 years, and meeting you has been really helpful. Just kind of not only shifting my thoughts more on women in ministry and how I can encourage them and uplift them, but even ecumenical is sometimes a cuss word for a lot of people. And they don't want to reach across denomination lines and stuff like that. And being able to speak to someone from a Methodist church, a Wesleyan background, and whether you agree with it or not, an egalitarian perspective and stuff, being able to have these kind of conversations has been really helpful. Let me just end with this. I know I've mentioned Katie Edwards, I've mentioned Neely McQueen, I've mentioned Allison Williams. Who are some female youth workers who you think people can Google or Instagram or Facebook real quick and say like, I want to follow their ministry, or they're just killing it?
Right.
Who are some other female youth workers
Sure.
that maybe men like me have just been living in a sandbox and just been looking at other youth workers? Who are some women that you think are just absolutely killing it right now?
Okay, so Heather Fleece at the DYM 200, she was ridiculously amazing. I mean,
she's at Wooddale. I think it's Wooddale Bible Church or Wooddale Community Church
and her
in
name
Minnesota.
Like flies, like FLIES. I can't wait to find something to try to book her for. I'm sure she's booked out for years.
She's great. She's great.
I mean, she just there's no arguing gender with her. She's just amazing in her own right. Elle Campbell from the Stuff You Can Use duo is amazing. Brooklyn Lindsay killed it at my middle school retreat. The one that we go to last spring. She just, I mean, boys, girls, she's going to appeal to everyone. She was amazing. Kenda Creasy Dean is a really incredible voice in youth ministry. She's from Princeton, and I mean, learn everything you can from that woman. Kara Powell, obviously from Fuller and Sticky Faith and Growing Young. And then Crystal Kurgis. I hope I'm saying that right. She was my small group leader. I just listened to this amazing podcast that she posted on her Facebook page, and I sent it to all high school teachers, all my clergy. She has a PhD. I mean, she's Dr. Kurgis, and she is, but again, she's still a youth worker. So, yeah, those are some really great folks. And actually, though, I think Elle Campbell is the one putting it together. Heather Lee Campbell. I hope I'm getting that right. I hope I'm getting the shout out right. She hooked me up when I asked for ideas. I don't know her at all except from Facebook and collaborative groups. And she hooked me up with some really cool ideas. She's got some great stuff on her website. You should definitely check her out. And Allison Williams, she's awesome. And then they are putting together Elle and some other folks are putting together a women youth ministry speakers database.
Wow, that's awesome.
That people who want to be more inclusive of having women speakers can use that resource. So that's awesome. And then, and yeah, like, be ecumenical in your community and just meet more women youth pastors where you live. And, sorry, I'm plugging in.
Oh, it's all good.
Youth pastors in your own community. I mean, you might be surprised how many there are when you branch out of your denom. So, yeah.
This has been so amazing. I want to thank you for doing this with me and talking about women in ministry and all this good stuff. If people wanted to find you, you could say no, so you don't have any creepers. But like, is there any social networks you want people to be able to find you if they want to ask you more questions or talk to you?
Sure. You can find me on Facebook. There's not that many Ansley Higginbothams in the world. If you want to follow our youth ministry page, it's at Reveille Youth on Instagram. So I'm on Twitter, Ansley Higginbotham. I don't ever check my my personal Instagram because I'm always on my youth Instagram. But I work, I'm youth at reveilleumc.org if anybody wants to get in touch and have a conversation. And I'll try to respect your faith tradition. And I'm not an activist, and I'm not interested in arguing, but I love listening. I love collaborating. So I love learning from other people. So
yeah. Well, you've made this Reformed Calvinist feel very welcome and heard. So it's great.
Likewise, thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and I'm so thankful to be able to have this conversation. I'm thankful for your voice, and I hope that this will bless other youth workers, other women to feel like they're being heard, and hopefully this is a benefit to others. So thank you.
And please sign up for DYM 200. Do it.
Yes.
Do it. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.